When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, "Weep, weep, weep, weep." So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved. So I said, "Hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair." And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was asleeping, he had such a sight. The thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their backs left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom, if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and we got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. It's important to know some background context for the chimney sweeper in order to more thoroughly appreciate its significance and feel its emotional impact. In the 17th and 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was raging, and with it came unsafe and abusive working conditions to which children were not immune. In fact, destitute children were the most vulnerable members of society, and while most people would have sympathized with their plight, few were doing anything to solve the issue of child labor. William Blake, one of the founding fathers of Romanticism, empathized with these children and was an advocate for ending child labor, as well as reforming education for children and reforming society's view of childhood in general. To Romantics, children were the seat of that which is good in humanity, that which possesses the power of benevolence, creativity, and wisdom beyond that which the adult world has managed to mar or destroy. The Chimney Sweeper is a reactionary poem. It does not really expose the cruel conditions children were subjected to when working as chimney sweeps, because people knew about these conditions already, but it rather exposes and condemns the apathy society displayed about this particular issue. The Chimney Sweeper comes from William Blake's collection, Songs of Innocence and of Experience, which is a series of poems and visual art pieces that were compiled as a book in 1794. It's important to note that the chimney sweeper we are reading and analyzing is the one that appears in Songs of Innocence. There is another poem titled The Chimney Sweeper that appears in the second part of the collection, aka Songs of Experience, that we won't read or analyze. Let's begin our analysis of the poem by looking at the structure of the poem. On the right hand, I number the number of stanzas. There's 6 stanzas in this poem, and each of those stanzas is made up of 4 lines. That type of stanza, a 4-line stanza, is called a quatrain. And each of these quatrains is in turn made up of 2 couplets. Right here, we can see how that is so. The first 2 lines with the ending young and tongue rhyme together, and that makes them a couplet. Line 3 and 4 also rhyme with each other, the words weep and sleep. That makes them the second couplet to complete the quatrain. The rhyme scheme for each stanza is AABB. When we determine a rhyme scheme, we assign a letter we start with A, and if the next one rhymes, we assign it an A too. That's why we have young and tongue. They rhyme with each other, and we assign the letter A. The third word, weep, does not rhyme with tongue anymore, so we assign it the next letter in the alphabet, B. And then sleep rhymes with weep, so we assign it a B again. The rhyme scheme repeats in all of the stanzas. There are a couple exceptions on stanza 5. For example, the word behind and wind are not exact or true rhymes, and that's why I assigned an lowercase a to indicate that that's slant rhyme. Slant rhyme is a poetic term, and that means that while it doesn't truly rhyme, the words are close enough that there's a little bit of a rhyme involved. We could also claim that, for example, dark and work are also a little bit slanted, but the general pattern is AABB for all the stanzas in the poem. In this screen, what I have done is I bolded and underlined some details of the text that I consider to be significant, and also some that may need some clarification, especially for younger readers. The blue highlighted text are elements of the poem that I consider to be essential in order to understand some of the deeper meanings, emotions involved in the poem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go stanza by stanza to give some analyses and some commentary. Some of the analyses will be the common details that readers should understand about the text, and some commentary may be a little bit more on the personal interpretation side. The first stanza says, "When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me, while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep." What we get from the first stanza is that the speaker is very, very young. He's a very little kid, by the fact that he cannot even pronounce the word sweep, and instead he says, weep, weep, weep. The significance about that line is that it reveals once again that the speaker is very young, a little kid, but it also is a play on the word weep and cry. So cry means to yell, so he's trying to yell the word sweep, 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 but once again, the use of the word cry is a play on the action of crying due to pain, whether physical or emotional. And the word weep, once again, literally means to cry. So it reveals that perhaps this speaker is in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering in his life. The other detail that I want to point out is the fact that the father sells the kid. Now, the selling of children to companies, for example, meant that the families didn't have to worry about childcare, which allowed them to save money and resources. In this case, the mother died, so the father is left with a kid who he probably cannot take care of, because the father would have had to go to work and couldn't take time off to take care of the child. That's an assumption that we can make. Now, the process of selling kids meant that the father or a family could sell or rent out a kid, say for a year or two, or for more time, to a company so that the child would do work. And this would free up the family, because the family had one less person to feed, and they also would get some sort of income, probably very little, very unfair, and it would go to the family, not to the child. The other detail that I want to point out about this stanza is the word suit. For younger readers, and especially for English learners, sometimes sometimes they don't know what soot is. So a simple Google search would help out. In Spanish, the word soot is tizne, and essentially, soot is the black substance that accumulates on a chimney due to the smoke. Um, Another thing I want to mention about the selling of a kid is that for a lot of people, it seems barbaric, and the poem is from such a long time ago that we have built some sort of distance. We think that this may not happen. But I actually know from personal experience that where I lived in Mexico, this practice was common up until the 1980s, probably even the 1990s, where a family would um, rent out a kid to a landowner so that they could help with the fields. And at the end of the season, the harvest season, the family would get corn or bean grain in exchange for the labor. Sharing this experience, the fact that this happened not that extremely long ago, helps with building some sort of social awareness in young people because we can assume that somewhere in the world, something like this is probably happening to children somewhere in the world. Stanza 2 says the following: There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved, so I said, Hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. Now, right here, the speaker is talking about a different chimney sweeper named Tom Dacre. And the reason I want to point that out is, once again, sometimes students miss the fact that the person who has the dream starting on stanza 3 is Tom Dacre. It's not the actual speaker of the poem. And because of this, we can assume that the speaker of the poem is an omniscient speaker, someone who knows everything about all the subjects of the poem. And in such a way, the speaker of the poem becomes sort of a representation of all chimney sweepers in general, speaking for all of them. The other moving, endearing moment that we see right here is the fact that the speaker, who is a child himself, refers to Tom as little Tom Dacre. And then he tries to comfort him, saying, Hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. The fact that we have a child trying to comfort a child is a moving and endearing moment. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that happen when there's a kid crying and another kid tries to soothe them. It's moving, but at the same time, in the context of this poem, it's quite heart-wrenching because the people who should have been trying to comfort the children are the adults and they're not present. It's a kid trying to comfort another kid. Another detail I want to point out is the white hair. Sometimes younger students ask me, why does he have white hair? And the reason is because the poem is supposed to be likely set in England, in London perhaps, and the kids there were blonde sometimes to the point that their hair looked white. Stanza 3 says the following: And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight, that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. Now, Tom is having a nightmare in this stanza that turns into a good dream by the following stanza. And one of the things that I want us to really pay attention to is those coffins of black, because they are a symbol representing the soot and the chimneys and on the literal level. But then they are also a representation of death. And I should add also of entrapment, of feeling confined, feeling as if they are imprisoned somehow by this condition of being chimney sweepers. Now, we want to know that many children died from lung diseases or from accidents related to chimney sweeping. Um, when I was taking a class in college, one of my professors mentioned that sometimes families would even forget that they had hired someone to come on a specific day. And while the kid was cleaning, they would start kindling the fire. Those are horrible things that did happen to certain kids at the time when they were doing chimney sweeping. And that's why this image is important, because being a chimney sweeper often led to an early death for a child. Now, here's a detail I forgot to mention in the context of the analyses. Why children to clean the chimney sweeps if it's so dangerous? And the answer is rather simple. The kids were small enough to fit through the chimneys, and the adults were not. So that's why they used them. Stanza 4 says the following: And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. The thing that draws my attention the most right here is the bright key. And one of the things that the bright key symbolizes is the hope that someone may care enough to help the children and liberate them from their plight. The images of children essentially playing that starts on this stanza and carries onto the next stanza is an image of what childhood should really be: full of innocence, full of play, which is a stark contrast to that which the chimney sweepers are actually experiencing. The fifth stanza says the following: Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. Now, while the last line in this stanza seems hopeful, the reader should realize that it is actually a grim outlook. For to have God for one's father, a person must be dead, if we consider the traditional Christian beliefs. In addition, this line is a reminder that these children don't have a father in real life who could truly protect them and give them peace and joy. Moving on to the last stanza, it says the following: And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. Now, this stanza, Tom is happy and warm, but only figuratively speaking, because of the dream he had. But in reality, he is cold and likely miserable. We know that because the morning is literally cold, the poem says so, but also because he's going to work in these dangerous, horrible conditions. Now, I interpret the very last line as William Blake becoming the speaker. To me, when I read that last line, it breaks the tone so much from the rest that I feel that the chimney sweeper is no longer the speaker, and it becomes William Blake warning the readers, the adults of the time, that those who do not do their duty will face consequences. The chimney sweepers are doing their duty. They will go to heaven as the innocent angels that they are, but the adults who fail to do their duty of protecting children will likely go in the opposite direction. Now, here's something I'd like to add, and it is that often when I research this poem, I come across sources on YouTube or elsewhere that mention that this poem is somehow optimistic, very positive, and uplifting. And I think a lot of the people who say that about this poem miss some of the irony that is included in the poem. If we consider, for example, the line that mentions that if Tom is a good boy, he'd have God for his father, we need to consider that William Blake was a little bit of a red romantic. He really was a revolutionary. Some of the ideas he had didn't sit well with society or the church at the time. And with this in mind, we can interpret the tone to be ironic. As I mentioned when we looked at stanza 5, that idea is that the kids, in order to be happy, in order to be protected, they need to reach God. And to reach God, you need to die. So the implication is that these kids are going to suffer. They're going to suffer until they die. And it was very likely that that would be the entirety of their time because, once again, a lot of accidents happen and a lot of lung diseases happen to these kids. So to say that the poem is positive is, I think, a misinterpretation. I think it has, it's just a very heart wrenching poem. I don't see the positivity. I don't see the uplifting of the spirit. I see more a big concern from the author about this major issue of the time that he wanted to point out to people that they were not doing anything to solve it. I think the common misinterpretation of this poem comes from the fact that the poem itself comes from the section of the book called Songs of Innocence, as opposed to Songs of Experience. So a lot of people think that because it's innocent, it's supposed to be more uplifting. I would like to say that the innocence is in the chimney sweepers. Tom and the chimney sweeper, the speaker of the poem, they are innocent and they're trying the best to live their life, and they will go to heaven. But the innocence should not be carried onto the reader because the reader should be able to interpret all the difficult situation the kids are experiencing. So even if Tom is feeling happy and warm, we should know that no, he's cold. The morning is cold, and he's going to a miserable job with dangerous conditions. Regardless, the poem is wonderful. It's one of the first poems that takes a social issue and brings it to the forefront of poetry, which is something that would become essential in the later Romantic period of literature in Great Britain. Thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe.